Uh, Last spring I talked about happiness, and I talked about happiness for people who basically had a relatively good life. Uh, Happiness is more difficult to grasp if you've had some major problems, and I'm going to tell you about some of those major problems, and I'm going to tell you about ways in which psychologists, sociologists, philosophers have suggested you still might prevail. I'm 87 years old. I have my ups and downs. Sometimes I feel content, good about myself, good about my life, and I'm relatively happy. But it doesn't last, and I hope you don't mind if I share some of my negative thoughts. The other times I am clearly unhappy. I am older than most or perhaps all of you. I fret about the years left to me. My lifespan from here on is shorter. I think more about death and endings. I hope you don't mind these negative thoughts. I'm going to talk about happiness in a minute.
They're part of life.
Yes. I retired at age 75. That was 13 years ago. Frankly, when you are retired, you do not receive the same respect from other people. It's ageism. And then there's the question of retirement. What am I going to do with my life? Put it another way, what will make my life worth living? And a kind of negative, but it's there. Suicide rates go up. They go up for teens and for people who are retired over 70 or so. All of these are depressing thoughts. For me, sometimes even terrifying thoughts. I am at an age in which happiness can be elusive. So I crave, I need, sometimes I must have some kind of blueprint to go forward. I need a plan that I can think about and consider when the blues move in. Maybe some of you do too. As I said last time I talked on this subject, I considered happiness from the point of view of someone who had a fairly easy early life. Happier is easier to find and grasp and hold on to for those of you who fit that picture. But what about those who had a more difficult early life? How about those who hit big bumps, big problems later on? We are going to look at what can cause us to be down in the dumps and discontented. Then we will consider some of the solutions to unhappiness, depression, and stress. But let's get started with the major difficulties with staying happy. One, which I hope none of you have experienced, but maybe some of you have. Childhood abuse and neglect. It has a large and lasting effect. As a psychologist, and especially as a forensic psychologist, I saw many kids and parents who had abused their children or neglected them. It's much more difficult to be happy or content on a continuous basis if you suffered some abuse or neglect. And the more intense, the more long-lasting that neglect or that abuse, the greater the effect. It distorts your perception of the world. You always half expect to be treated badly in the future. It's somewhere in the back of your mind. And you become, oftentimes, it's easier to become angrier and threatening, or more submissive. You know, that's a strange kind of paradox. But people who have been abused tend to be those who will either be angry and threatening with others, or, oh my gosh, oh, I love you, please, and are submissive. And you know, abuse and neglect, it influences you at a very basic level. It influences your physiology. It can change your physiology and how your inner chemicals respond to the world. A second problematic issue has to do with physiology. And now I'll extend that to genetics and illness. You know, just to get a little bit technical for a moment, we all have pleasure centers in our brain. It's in the deeper levels of our brain. And for some of us, and this is really true, for some of us, it's harder to turn on those pleasure centers. It can be genetics. It can be like in schizophrenia, in people who suffer continuously from depression. It's harder to turn on that pleasure center. There's also a whole bunch of hormones that get in the way. Endorphins, serotonin, oxytocin, dopamine, all which can increase positive emotions or damp them down. And cortisol, the stress hormone. And you can ask yourself, did your dad or mom suffer from depression? Did they have bad moods? Then if you have bad moods, you can blame it on your parents. Of course, maybe they're not totally responsible either, because maybe their genetic heritage also had some of those depressive elements. But our genes and our physiology do influence joy, hope, pride, depression, anxiety, inspiration, love, gratitude, and all of those. And happiness has been so important to people throughout the world for generations. There's massive research on it, and when I'm talking now, I am summarizing some massive research, enough to fill all of these rooms down here, the research. Clearly, it's been an important topic, and your genes and your physiology do make a difference. Your age makes a difference. I've mentioned this. You tend to be more worried and less happy in your teen years or when you're elderly and retired. These are the times when depression hits, when suicide rates go up, and they do. And when people are more stressed. Another area, and some of you might be experiencing this, unemployment or low income. Both of those, unemployment, low income, lead to higher divorce, higher major illnesses, and higher suicides. As you may know, many in the U.S. nowadays need 2 jobs to be able to have any kind of stable life. Boy, has that changed over the past 50 or so years. That's changed, you know. When I was a kid, and thereafter for some years, a man could be working, or a woman, and support a whole family, one alone, and do a pretty good job of it. It's changed. The rich are getting richer. Companies are getting richer. And the poor are getting poorer. So, unemployment and low income. You know, even awareness of inequality makes a difference. Awareness that, oh my gosh, there's so many people around me who have more than I do. That can make a difference. It's interesting that in Finland and Norway, differences in income are much less. There are excellent social services, and it's not that you have to buy it. They're there for you. The differences between in Finland and Norway are much smaller between the haves and the have-nots. And you know, there have been all kinds of studies. People are happier there. We suffer when we sense, oh my gosh, I have so little, and look. The awareness of inequality, it just preys on us. There's another problematic issue for us that can enter in and make people unhappy. Even if you've had a pretty darn good life, what happens if disaster strikes? This can be from a hurricane, a fire, flooding of your home. Any of these increase PTSD, that's post-traumatic stress disorder, and other serious mental illnesses and physical illnesses. Disaster episodes are especially hurtful if there's no safe drinking water or food, and that happens at times. No safe drinking water or food, and it's like you're scared, what do I drink, and am I going to get sick from this? The hurricanes down south occurred, and there were months at which people had difficulty getting food and good water, and they felt threatened much of the time. It can be especially devastating with a disaster if you lose a loved one, and even if you lose your little dog, it's like, it hurts. If one feels that his or her life is in danger, the probability then shoots up of mental illness or physical illness. Okay, that's the fifth major problematic issue. The last one is also, here's one that also poisons the well for you. It's low support network. We all need kin, friendships, and community groups maybe. They're also important. Without these support networks, stress increases, illnesses and death rates climb. Let me repeat that. It's without those support networks, friendships, community, kin, without those, death rates climb, physical illness climbs, suicide rates climb. And by the way, community includes churches, fellowships. Does that mean that if you stop attending this fellowship, you're liable to get ill? Well, maybe I shouldn't go that far. But it is important to have a base and people that you can turn to and are concerned about you. So if one of these negatives prevail, you're more prone to discontent. Childhood abuse, neglect, poor physiology, age. There are certain years when you're a teen or retired. Stress, depression, illness, unemployment, low income. All of these are downers. And a natural disaster. If you're doing fine, but a natural disaster comes and strikes and hits you hard, that can do you in two. Finally, that network of friends and community. All of these qualify as downers and stresses and increased illness and death rates. So what do we do about this? I'm going to now talk about 10 different solutions. I'll talk about each of these briefly. 10 different areas in which, if you can focus on them, if you can think about it, you might be able to make a difference in your life if you have one of those problematic and difficult issues. This seems in some ways kind of strange. If you're really down and depressed and so forth, one of the things that can help is to become a do-gooder. It's like you shake your head. That's taking on something additional, and here you're depressed. Well, there's a hell of a lot of evidence that if you're depressed and you begin to help other people, it lifts your depression. Not quite sure why that occurs, but it's almost universal. It just helps.
I'd say because
maybe
you're not thinking of yourself.
Yes.
You're not thinking of yourself
Yes.
when you're doing something for
Yes.
somebody else. Your focus is there.
I think that's part of it.
Yeah.
One study found 63% fewer deaths for the elderly over a 10-year period if they regularly acted like a do-gooder. That's huge. Now, that's a discrete population, and that's one study, and but there is a notable amount of evidence that it can help many people. You can call, write a note, you can visit often. So be a do-gooder. Another thing, second thing, list of things you are grateful for on a daily basis. Add to the list. I started doing that in October. Sometimes I miss a day, and then I, well, I don't add, fill in, but I'll start again and add. And every day I can think of certainly something to be grateful for. And sometimes in the middle of the week or the next week, I'll remember one of those things when I'm having worried thoughts. There is so much that each of us can be grateful for. And it's a buffer. Feeling grateful. It's a buffer to fretting and worry. A third is joining a support group, like this fellowship, or a woman's lunch group, a new mother's group, AA, that's Alcoholics Anonymous. There are many, many groups around. So, if you've had one of those problematic issues, if you can take charge and say, look, I'm going to do something. I'm going to find a group. That can be a help. A fourth one, exercise. Before I came here this morning, I was grieving, and I spent about 3/4 of an hour doing hard exercise. The physical pain erased the mental pain for a while, and it helps. Run, swim, yoga, especially if you do this 4 or 5 times a week. But even 10 minutes a day can help. And just about every week you can read of another study in which exercise does aid with stress, depression. So I do that. A fifth one, meditate. Boy, if you're capable of doing this, it can calm you. And most people are. If you need to, go to a therapist briefly and say you want to learn to meditate. Look it up. Get a book on meditation. I don't know what the percentage are, but I think that at least 90% of people can learn to meditate. Good.
Just want to point out that there's a whole bunch of different definitions of meditation.
Yeah.
A whole bunch of different ones.
Yeah, there are.
Depending on what type you might look into, it may suit you or not suit you. So if you look into one and you think that doesn't suit me at all, keep looking.
Yeah. You're right. You're right. Did you have something, Yvonne? Oh, Clyde.
Oh,
I don't know.
No, it was you, but I had something too. You go first.
All right. I've meditated for years, and I think of it as the opposite face of the coin, that is prayer. When I was a Baptist, people were always yammering at me, pray, 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 pray. No. Turn it over and meditate and open to see whether there is
Yes.
information available.
Yes. Good. Did you?
I was just wondering about the Thursday night group still. Kathy sent me a Facebook link, but I'm so terribly unsociable that I don't have a Facebook password, so it's open. That's one thing on my list of things to do.
It would be better to touch base with me regarding the meditation group, because I'm the one who basically opens and I'm always here
Oh,
for it.
so that's an ongoing thing every
Yeah.
Thursday night?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll check
But
with
yeah,
you.
check with me,
Oh.
because, if we have to cancel it, then I'm definitely the one who knows.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll be gone for the holidays for
Yeah.
an extended period of time, but I'll check with you on that.
Cool.
Thank you.
Well, I think this Thursday we'll probably try to do it.
Yeah, this Thursday it's gonna happen, but they're leaving, so.
I may be here this Thursday.
Okay.
Maybe most of you know this, but you know, Sebby is absolutely right. There are so many different kinds, and some kinds might not fit you. You know, one kind that I've sometimes used is just thinking of a beautiful place where I have been and thinking about that. And every time my mind wanders, it bringing it back to that issue. Another is just counting from 1 to 10 and 1 to 10 again. And if your mind wanders, get back to the counting. That's another one. Another one is clearing your mind and thinking of nothing. That's a harder one to do. Sometimes I just think of like clouds, and that's like almost nothing. And it becomes a kind of fog. At any rate, there are a lot of different kinds of meditation, and that it lowers your blood pressure. And boy, when you meditate, if you've been angry or upset, depressed, after 10 minutes or so of meditation, you don't feel those. They vanish. Emotions tend to vanish. And that's a strong effect. So,
Meditation, has also been proven to help with the actual physical pain as well. Whenever I was in Lama's classes, they talked about visualization and going to a happy place
yes.
whenever you're in pain, during labor, and it helps tremendously, because it helps take your mind off of it.
It's obvious that a goodly number of people here practice some meditation, and to good effect. And so remember, if life causes you to be down in the dumps and you're tumbling around, this is another thing that you can do, meditate. Hey, I'm on number 6. This may require a little thought. It's be open to growth and adventure. It's to go beyond the boundaries of your comfort zone. If you can get beyond your comfort zone into some kind of adventure or new growth, it can help. It means being more curious, perhaps more open to strangers, less skeptical. One time, a long time back, I had a new friend, Kathy and I had a new friend, who was terribly depressed. Her partner had left her. And this was the love of her life, and oh boy, was she in a hole. We took her hiking in Scotland. We pressed her and insisted, and she came with us somewhat reluctantly. And she got over there still depressed. She said that at one point, you know, we were near a small river. She thought of just walking into the river and getting rid of herself. We started hiking. And there were mountains on each side. We were in a valley. There were snowy peaks here and there. There's, oh boy, like every 100 feet there would be waterfalls coming down. Scotland had a lot of rain. We hiked in the rain with backpacks. And she is trudging along and looking, and for moments, the depression left her, and she was feeling good again. It just vanished. That wasn't permanent. It would come back, and she'd go back and forth and back and forth. But she ended up feeling, hey, there can be places where you can find some joy and pleasure. She's still my best friend. She lives right next door to me. I gave her some land. I love her. She's a great woman. So, be open to adventure. Go beyond your comfort zone. Another one. 7. If you can, be less rigidly conscientious. Having a more laissez-faire attitude regarding attendance at things, regarding fewer always must do. The list of always must do, that sense of I gotta, I have to. Oh boy. That cripples you, that feels like a vice. And if you can have somewhat of a more laissez-faire attitude, maybe that means if you have a young kid, maybe that means, and you're feeling down, maybe that means palming off the kid or asking someone to come in and help for a little while. So you can do things to restore yourself. Caregivers oftentimes suffer. Caregivers who feel they must do. And boy, if you're a friend of a caregiver, be a friend and say, hey, let me take over for a while. I'll be there. You go off and do something.
Hey, freaking men!
Yeah.
Sorry.
I feel ya.
Sorry, I got a little excited there.
Al Yeomans, who was the president of this organization, was dying. He was a good friend of mine, a best friend. And Evelyn Phillips, who is also a president, past president, was with Al. She was his paramour and mate. They didn't live together, but she started living with him. And she was there 24/7, except I would go in and say, hey, go off for half a day, go away and do something. And that was just, it was just the caregiver. She needed that. And think of the caregivers in your life and do for them. That can help.
Just a quick response to that, though. That's absolutely true. It's also true that one other thing that you had talked about earlier about giving or whatever kind of falls into having important responsibilities in your life, because there's a balance there.
Yeah.
If you have important responsibilities in your life, if you set yourself up into a position where there are things that you feel responsible for, that also helps to combat depression because you feel needed.
Yes.
So,
Good point. Kiss, kiss. Good point. She's a great lady. You had a lot of good ideas. Here's one that can be difficult to implement, perhaps. But boy, you can work on it. If having down periods and you don't have that close good friend, try to develop a best friend. You know, being able to push forward. I don't have right now a good male friend that's close by, and that's troubling to me. And I'm trying to find someone to fill that space. I haven't yet. I certainly have some good female friends. At any rate, the good friends help you celebrate your joys, and our understanding of your sorrows. And the good friends are not the people who say, oh yes, I'll tell you, you should. No, the good friend is the one who listens and empathizes and doesn't tell you what you should do. And leaves it up to you. But comes around frequently and says, boy, I just wanted to drop in and talk with you for a while. Or I just wanted to talk with you over the telephone. And sending a note. And whatever.
And I wanna add something to that.
Yes.
The good friend is also the one who will sometimes tell you things you don't want to hear. That's, I play that role to some people. It's valuable.
That's, from my point of view as a psychologist, I would say, there are occasions when that's true. But ordinarily, if you're a friend for long enough,
You
and
accept
just
the person.
listen, they'll come to good conclusions themselves. That's a Rogerian point of view that's got a lot of background data for it. However, I'll grant you that there are times when people need a little kick in the ass.
Tough love.
A final one. Solution to suffering from the Dan period. Acknowledge negative emotions. Acknowledge if you're angry, if you're jealous, if you're anxious. You may have to hide such feelings from a lot of other people around, but acknowledge it to yourself and share it when you can with a good friend. Many people in the United States are kind of taught, maybe especially men, oh, have a stiff upper lip. When trouble comes, just slug on through. Don't let it get you down. Be a man. Pardon the language, but screw that. That isn't good for you. It is good to acknowledge. If it just has to be to yourself, to yourself. One of the things I tend to do at times is just write out. Sometimes I'll take a couple of days to do that. I'll write out the negative feelings and what they're about and get them down on paper. And as I get them down, it gets more elaborate. It gets more meaning to it. It adds to it. And that's the way of, acknowledging to yourself, which you can share then with someone at times, if you are comfortable doing so. But we all have those down periods. We all have them. And it is a good idea to share, to allow yourself. And now, the last one, the 10th one, is just what she said a minute ago. Develop a meaningful life. Again, Aristotle, that famous ancient Greek, repeatedly spoke about this. He spoke about developing goals that transcended yourself So Jean, here's what you were saying. Goals that transcend yourself. Helping the sick, the friendless, and most especially the elderly. Especially the elderly. I mean, volunteer at a soup kitchen. Invite immigrants to dinner.
Or your next door neighbor.
Yeah. Or
Which
next door neighbor. There
people
you go.
don't know.
Give a talk on humanism. I suppose even internet support of others helps. I think it does. You know, so many people get addicted to that, and I'm not sure that it really helps that much, but it does help some, I'm sure.
I mean, it does help bring together, family members that are far away.
Yeah. Yes,
Yes.
yes.
It's not addiction, it's socialism.
Yeah, that, excellent.
Need socialization.
Oh, and, you know, giving money to the elderly too.
And then just say your PayPal in case people want to do it.
I guess you can forget that one, for the moment. at
See
any
what
rate.
direction this is going, Randy.
Hey, if anyone would like a copy of this, you can get it on the internet tomorrow or the next day
I regret
from
not
our
being here.
website. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Randy.
I much appreciate
I
the
didn't know there was
chance to pontificate or whatever I was doing. Goodbye for now.